just the human interaction that we're trying to skip over and go to AI and say like it's a mathematical equation. You've heard this 1,000 times. The sales is just a numbers game. I beg to differ. I beg to differ in a big way. And I'll bring up one stat without trying to call out anybody out on this, is that I was dealing with a CEO at a startup company that I'll just say I worked for in the past, so you could probably extrapolate here, and he said, and I asked him before I joined, I was an advisor, and I said, how many demos have you done for this product? It looks great. And he goes, 80. And I was like, wow. And I said, how many have you closed? How many customers do you have? 1. Ooh, that's a tough number. I said, but here's what I want to tell you. Sales actually counts. How you present it, how you discover, how you figure out if it's a good, it's aligned with their needs and it solves their problem is important.
Welcome to the Sales Team 6 podcast, where we break down the secrets of high-performing sales teams with high-performing leaders. And today, I'm super excited. Today we've got on Brian McCreedy, who's a veteran revenue leader with over 25 years of sales experience. He led an elite team at Flextronics, and they closed over $250 million with a B in deals with 0 losses in their first year. He's currently serving as a revenue leader at Hive Pro, and Brian has a very unique approach. Combines psychological insight with practical application and mindset, and he's got some pretty badass experience as far as the startup world and what it takes to actually be successful for early stage startups. Brian, welcome. Good to have you on.
Hey, glad to be here. Interesting topic, of course, for sure.
Yeah, and I think it's with the number of startups coming up, with the bar to entry being lower than it's ever been, I think this is really, really relevant for a lot of people out there in the space. So you did some pretty cool stuff at Flextronics, some pretty impressive numbers. What were the key principles? How did you do that?
I'll say this. The team there, it's an internal team that they used to call Novo, right? It's not even a public facing name, just an internal team of like their top salespeople, led by Caroline Dowling. She'll probably love that reference in this call. But they had what I would call a militaristic approach, but really it was founded on a few key concepts. One was no ego, right? Number 2 is like insane preparation. Like always be prepared to not only go in, but close with everybody that you talk to. Flextronics is one of the largest manufacturing EMS companies in the world, about $50 billion in revenue at the time annually when I was there. And this team said very clearly, we are there to win. It is all about winning. There will be no egos. We will go in wildly prepared, and actually we will have every answer before they ask it. And in doing so, and then, of course, representing one of the largest and best manufacturing services company in the world at the time, that's a killer combination, right? It's actually, they said, the company will tell you at that company, they say, you'll never lose for our services or our capabilities. The rest is all about selling. So that mindset going in puts you in a very powerful position. Well, of course, we did all those things, prepared endlessly, had no ego, went in, and we literally not only closed $250 million in business, but had no losses. These are very large size deals, so I want to make that clear. Anywhere between 40 to 100 plus million per win, but never lost. That is I'm sure there's a few people eating their hearts out right now hearing that, but the fact is it was an incredible team. And, I would say the biggest foundation of my selling career was built and honed with Flex at the time. They're now known as Flex.
Very cool. And I love the way you answered that with, asked about leadership, and what that was, and your answer was the team, right? You talked about no ego sales, and you literally just demonstrated what it looks like to not have an ego, right? Of how they did it. And I think that's so important because you see, in the military, as soon as you've got somebody with an ego, that puts everybody at risk. And all of a sudden somebody puts their own needs above the needs of the team. And so how do you manage that because sales also requires confidence, right? It does require a lot of self-belief, especially if you're going to go in and close deals of that size. So how do you balance having the confidence in yourself, in your product, in your team, and even confidence as a leader without it spilling over into the side of ego?
I think the focus really does, and again, it's similar to Flex, but it's not the only, it's just the concept is if you're focused on winning, and you're focused on the how that actually gets accomplished. And in what I do today in cybersecurity software, it actually is critical to understand that like it is the product at the end of the day, right? You have to have a good product, but the actual effort is all about winning, and it's about a performance in selling and a belief in your particular product. Right? So that same thing applies, I think, to every industry and to every category. But the way you keep it no ego is that sales is a wonderfully power-packed and pressure-packed industry and position to be in. But the best part about it to me is it's almost like a math equation. You either win or you lose. There's really not a lot of stuff in between. I mean, you can make believe there is, but if you're incredibly prepared, you have no ego going in, and there is actually an opportunity to do two things, right? It's not just a win, but it's a win for both sides. It's a win for the customer. It's a win for us, right? If you're focused on that, it's amazing how you can let the ego fall to the wayside and it doesn't become an issue, right? If it's like somebody's seeking credit for a part of the project that they did, it's not really that important. Did you win? If everybody wins, the team wins, and everybody gets to like literally split the spoils of victory, right? If you lose, by the way, it's a team loss as well. You can't point fingers in a no ego situation. It's like, hey, look, it's a team. We have 5 members of that team. If one of us fails, we all fail, because at the end of the day, it is black and white. You win or you lose. And so I think that it contributes. It's a unique experience to be able to do that in a kind of a no ego environment, but it also lends itself to wins and losses kind of decide the day, right? It's not like a MBO towards a particular effort that you made with a client. It's like, were you able to close the deal and win that deal and obviously make both the customer and the company happy, or were you not? I love that environment for having a basically focused on winning attitude versus focusing on individual personalities. The personalities kind of have to get out of it at some point for you to be effective. And when you're all rowing in the same direction, I think it's obvious, and everybody kind of gets on with it very, very quickly. A few wins will be amazing at stopping any sort of kind of ego from happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like you're describing something that I teach as well, which is really focusing on the outcome, right? And seeing that victory ahead of time and always seeing the win-win situation, because and when you get the entire team, or when you get a group of people all with that same picture, with that same vision, focused on the same outcome, all of a sudden the team becomes much more powerful than any of its individual components.
Correct.
But you must have had, I mean, was this always the way that you operated, or were there early days of ego or team members with ego? How did this become such a focal point for you?
Yeah, well, I'll be honest. I don't think up until a certain kind of level of experience, I had there was no process like this. In my early days, it was actually based on the environment that I was selling in. I was just one individual. I could go in, close deals, basically serve as kind of a lone wolf and actually even help close a deal. And of course, at that point, there was a bit of ego involved, right? It was like I did it. Nobody else helped. I was selling a smaller service, a more approachable kind of close, if you want to call it that. Like it was a product that didn't need a big team to help me close it. And in that environment, ego would just seem to be fine. But as you get into larger and larger POs, you start working with a C-suite to get deals closed, and you have to deal with, say, 5 to 10 members of a team for a decision. Those same rules do not apply anymore, and they can't apply. There won't be one person that purchases a $50 million contract from a Flex, and so you have to have an entire team involved. And at that point, you have to build a team to help sell. And that's when things change from kind of an individual effort into a team effort. And then that's when the ego cannot be part of the mix.
So is that something you look for then when you're looking to build a team? Do you look at, the raw talents and the raw experience, or do you look for the personality, or what's your mindset when it comes to building that team?
Yeah. So I think there's going to be one unique part of this. So really most of it is actually attitude. Right. Almost everything else can be learned, but there's this level of seniority of thought that actually does need to be there, because at the end of the day, you have to match your sales team with who you're communicating with. Right. So if you're communicating almost strictly with the C-suite, you have to have C-suite level communicators. But beyond that, that's not something you can teach overnight, by the way. So it tends to be a little bit longer process. So it's a combination of both, but attitude is probably the number one. I like to think of two things that are going to probably sound a little bit funny, but because they're outside the norm. I love finding people who would, chew through steel for a victory. Obviously, those are super important things, but you can also do that at a very young age or an old age, right? That's the inbuilt part. It's really probably genetic. The other part is I like to find people, especially in sales, customer facing, that have a chip on their shoulder. Maybe they've been done wrong by a prior client or a company or a boss or something like that too. Because what ends up happening is I call it the Tom Brady rule. Like he was overlooked and he wasn't taken seriously. And when he got his chance, boy, he really hit it out of the park, right? Pardon the baseball term for a football player. But realistically, the people that have had too many things put in front of them as far as resistance tend to really thrive when they get the opportunity and the chance. And they're willing to put aside ego and everything else for a victory or a Super Bowl, in this case, for a Tom Brady. And those are the people that are it's a unique set of skills or attitude. And I look for those people. I really do.
So somebody look for the attitude, and that chip is pretty powerful. That's interesting because it's almost the other side of the coin of ego, where somebody does have something to prove, but almost not in an arrogant manner. I guess what's the difference? Like, what's the difference between having a chip on your shoulder versus having an ego?
Yeah, first of all, I think having an ego to a certain degree as far as confidence goes is clearly a good thing, and it's probably required. But I think the biggest difference is you've not had your chance to shine, right? And you believe not, and I call that basically internal confidence. You've been looking for your avenue to do that, right? And it could be both, accolades. It could be financial, hopefully financial if you're in sales, but it could be a lot of things, right? It could just be working for the right people that are all in the same mindset, that have that kind of A team or A plus team, as I like to call it here at Hive Pro. They have that attitude. So you'd be shocked. I mean, people have different motivations. They're all different, and in a way that is unique to them. But having that chip on their shoulder is like that. I call it like the permanent motivator, right? They want to show off, and it could be to themselves. It could be to the team. It could be to the company. I love that idea. And by the way, in a no ego environment, I mean, arrogance obviously it's not only welcomed, it can be a serious detriment to team chemistries. It's got to be confidence. It's got to be internal, need. It can't be arrogance or ego. Otherwise, obviously it defies the concept we're looking for. You can, by the way, interview for that. It's not impossible to find out. You got to have your feelers out, but I've got a couple of key questions that I ask people that tend to surface that pretty quickly. And company, product, and team should always be easy to do business with, both internally and externally. And so that is part of the mix.
Mm. Very cool. So you got some secret sauce as far as knowing what to look for, knowing what to screen for. You said something really interesting a minute ago. I want to circle back to. You talked about C-suite level communication, which is, I've never heard that phrase like that before. But what's the difference between an average communicator or even a poor communicator versus a C-suite level communicator?
So this is one of my favorite subjects, and I probably should charge you for this. But the reality is C-suite communication isn't what people think it is, right? So the typical, I'll just say, outreach in sales looks a certain way, and it's terrible, by the way. It's terrible. And it's formalized, and it's, links and paragraphs and it's all the things that, by the way, CXO folks hate, right? So ironically, there's two things that you really have to be aware of in C-suite communication. One is, it's not locker room talk, but it is casual. It is casual, and it is pert. It's extremely pert. It's a 1-sentence, 2-sentence outreach to these folks because that's what they understand. Because you know who else communicates that way? The other C-suite members. They all do. And so if you understand and learn from it, that's one part of the communication. The other one is C-suite members don't look at technical acumen of a product or even, ROI or dollars and cents. What they look at is the business value. How's it going to improve what they're doing? The bottom line, especially if they're public companies, they know exactly what that looks like. And the business value to them and the personal value to them as their internal brand as a C-suite member is more important than anything else. And so if you go to a C-suite member and say, hey, look, our product technology is amazing and it does this and it'll slice your bread for it, but you're not communicating on their level. Even in the most eloquent speech and talk and communication style, you're not meeting their needs. So knowing a business value to them and their personal brand and value internally is what a C-suite member listens to. And so you have to be able to deliver that, even though you're overlaying it over your technical product or solution. So it is, again, mildly trainable, but also you have to be able to switch gears and do something that is against your nature, which is communicate casually and directly and very succinctly to somebody who you want to obviously win over as a client. It's a unique set of skills, but it's counterintuitive.
That was profound. I think people listening to that was, I'm going to go back and listen to that again because there was a lot there. What I heard was, know the person, you're speaking to the person and understanding what it is that drives them, that they care about, and keep it simple. And I think one of the things that I see a lot, this always drives me crazy, is when somebody overcomplicates what they're saying and uses a lot of technical jargon, big words. It looks like they got at their fifth thesaurus and took lessons from high school English and tried to use fancy words to sound smart. And I'm like, you sound like an idiot though, because I don't know what you just said. I have no idea what you just said because you were trying to sound fancy. Just make it simple. So I resonate with that a lot. That was cool. Thank you for that. So you said something in our last call where you treat your salespeople, your team members as business owners.
Yes.
What is that? Talk to me about that. What is that?
Yeah, it's part of the indoctrination into any sales team led by Brian, but also at Hive Pro. What I look for on top of all the other characteristics that we just talked about is I like to find people who also might have a chip on their shoulder, but they can act, and I love the idea of being a business owner. I want them to be a business owner, whether they're handling a territory in sales on the East Coast, or whether they're a VP of sales, or whether they're an SDR. The idea behind what we talked about briefly, which is like radical ownership or ownership in that sense, is if you can run your day and your business and your interactions with clients, both internal and external, as a business owner, you're taking full responsibility from beginning to end of what happens in your success, right? You're not looking to somebody else to either blame or point a finger at, but you're also not, running down the hallway saying, look at me, right? You're saying, look, this is a business. There's things that I have to do. I have to own every part of it. I have to know what works, what doesn't work. I have to know how to prioritize my time because I don't have an unlimited amount of it, and be effective, right? And then in doing so, of course, I reap the rewards, especially from a sales role. But if those people can do that, I end up, in theory, although it's not true, working myself out of a job because I know that independently, if I back them up in their journey as a business owner, they will do everything that the company and I need without, God forbid, micromanaging or doing anything else that actually will be a detriment to both sides. They can run it on their own. And I love it when independence is rewarded and they start making decisions on their own that actually helps build success. And of course, we want to duplicate that success so they can mentor and act as a business owner and hire their own people eventually. That's the goal.
Yeah, it's very like with great power comes great responsibility, giving that to somebody. And I'm curious because this concept and even this phrase of ownership gets thrown around a lot, almost like a buzzword. And there's even a book about the extreme levels of ownership. But what is that actually? Something that I notice a lot is people talk about it, but almost as a concept, but don't really know how to actually apply it. So what does that really, really mean, like on the ground, day to day, for somebody to really, really actually take ownership of their role? Like, what does that actually look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. We get a lot of, I'll just say, anybody who onboards or comes into a company tends to have a lot of questions at the beginning, right? How do I do this? What's this procedure like? How do I do, this? How do I know more about the product, et cetera? Ownership kind of starts at that level, and I'll just use onboarding as an example. I tell people the same thing. I want you to become an expert on the product. I want you to become an expert on process. I want you to become an expert on, internal communications, right? I want you to understand and know everybody on the team. I want you to do all these things. Why? Because it's a requirement for my protocol? No. Because that way, ultimately, you can start acting as me and be independent in your knowledge of what everything is. So, and the reason why is at some point, I don't want you to ask me questions about how to do things. I want you to tell me about what you've been doing and how you've been successful. And so when you turn that into, it's not that I don't want the questions initially, I do. I want you to get so confident in what you're doing today that it's your environment, your company, right? Act like an owner in the sense of the owner of the company. We all know who that is at Hive Pro, but I want you to act like him so you don't need to have those same decisions made through a chain of command when you can actually do them yourselves. I'll empower that, right? I'll have your back whenever you need to make a decision. And I'll back that up as long as you become an expert on all things in this company that you can do on your own. When people hear that, the right people are like, I've never had a better job or boss in the world, right? I mean, this is amazing. But other people will be like, well, no, I still want to ask questions, right? There is a dividing line, right? It doesn't work for everybody, but I am looking for, at least in building my team, and I feel like I have an A+ team currently. They all do that. They all operate on their own. They don't have to continually field questions because they've owned it and they want to be extremely good at their job. And of course, there's benefit to that beyond just the role and being an employee. They do see themselves as owners.
Got it. So it's that taking responsibility and getting that outcome or getting the knowledge for themselves. Where's the balance of, because there's absolutely the ability to go figure it out and do the research and look for all the answers. But sometimes the fastest way to an answer is to just ask somebody who already knows it and shortcut time and just get the information from the horse's mouth, so to speak. So how do you balance that? Is there like a time limit on it, or?
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing. And I'll just tell you, I also promote one kind of tenet of what I do, which is transparency, right? So I try to be as transparent as possible with all my people. And I think also just with clients and prospects as well, right? I mean, it's just utter like ridiculous transparency is so like, it's so heartwarming for clients, prospects, and internal folks to handle, right? They just like, I can't believe I don't know everything, obviously, but allowing them to do that is important. When it comes to that ownership, and like you said, it's much better to get it from one place. Part of the transparency thing, which is going to sound like a tool or a product, is we record everything, right? We record everything here at Hive Pro. And one of the reasons why is I could explain to 10 different people, 10 different ways what happened on a prior call where we had some really, amazing magic happen during a presentation. Or I can just show that to them. And it's not just the recording of the process. There's, transcripts and there's all these other things. And I even take snippets. I do weekly product showcases for our product to our internal people and external people. And the reason why is one-to-many is a far better way of actually getting the regimen down and getting some of the magic that happens in a process. That ownership piece is part of it though, right? You have to come in, own that, even the responsibility of getting there and understanding that. But I would much rather do it one time, record it and share it, than I would to try and explain it 10 times, right? Or 100 times, God forbid. That's one way. But there are many different versions of that where I do like to bring in when information is important and have it shared, widely, versus on an individual basis. To me, it's part of my ownership, but that's a big one for the company. Oh, are you getting some background noise?
Yeah, are you hearing that too?
Yeah, the volume has gone way down.
Hang on one sec.
It may be on my side. I think a heater just kicked on. Should I fix that?
Oh, that's probably what it is.
Hold on one second. Sorry, you can.
Yeah, it's yours.
I don't know if you can edit, but that may have killed the recording part.
Nah, it's fine. I'll use there's an editing. This platform has editing capabilities. It'll chop this part out. And there's some pretty cool sound. That may not even get picked up in the final recording.
Usually, at least on Zoom, there's such a noise suppression that you wouldn't even hear that. I've never heard anybody even react to it before, so apologies.
No worries. This is the real world, real life.
Real world. Well, it's just ironic that you can actually see it. There it is, right?
Yeah.
The thermostat, so.
That's good. So essentially when it comes to taking ownership and answering questions, asking questions is fine, but also the answers are already there. So don't ask a question where you can just go look at the answer that's already been put out there. A lot of times what I tell clients is like, you can come to me with any question, but at least come to me and tell me what you've already tried. Figure out, show me you've made some amount of effort, and then I'll give you the answer if it's so. Makes sense. If you have a library of answers, a library of information, find the answers.
Well, I think so. I mean, I'll even take that a step further. So the idea that you should have tried first, I think maybe at least in this organization, is probably built in, right? Don't just come to me for every single little question, of course. And I have quite a few people that report to me, but it's like I like to think this. It's not about writing it down or having a set of questions or what have you, but like, if you've tried to resolve it first and you can't resolve it, Of course, I want to know about that. But have you also tapped the other resources in the company, which you now should have become familiar with, right? It's a startup where I work. So there's not 500 people on a family tree to look through. It's really just a handful of people. And so the question will be, I can tell you to go to Zyra for this information, but next time, just go to Zyra first. And then if you can't get it resolved, come back to me. And it's usually pretty well received, right? It's not a correction as much as let's learn where the resources are. It's a small company, and then go to them first, right? It's actually best handled. Almost everything's handled best direct. There's very few things in a startup that need multiple layers of approval. So we try to operate that way.
Well, the startup world is a little different than a more established or a behemoth business. And you've seen a lot of action, so to speak. What does it take to succeed in the startup world?
Well, this is a great question because it's not easy, right? This is definitely not an environment for everybody. If you like to wear 5 hats, if you like to actually have a major impact over how a company performs, this is a great environment. If you don't like pressure, a lack of clarity, a lack of structure, a lack of some of these other things that almost every other company of scale will provide, then it's obviously not a good environment, right? But for those people who crave, literally going back, ownership, independence, the ability to have an impact, to make a difference, and of course, achieve what I would call breakout success. Almost everything is breakout success for a startup and also the employees in that startup. And of course, there's financial incentives for being an early owner of a company as well, right? Having ownership in a company, which is not usually the case if you go work for HP or Cisco, right? Then it is your environment, right? If you love that, if you want the challenge, the big challenge, but then there's not only financial rewards, but there's honestly a resume reward at the end of the day, right? Well, what are the companies going to allow you to do 5 different things that are maybe in your scope, but then out of your scope, or challenge yourself to go in a different direction? You're not going to find that in a big company. You're only going to find it in startups. So there's lots of positives, but there's also lots of negatives that people need to understand. And when it comes to, I'll call it sales leadership in a startup, it is extremely pressure filled, but can be, wildly lucrative, both from a career standpoint and for, financially. But it's hard. I mean, there's no doubt. I won't say that it's not, and I've done it over and over and over again now. But it's still a big challenge.
Yeah, definitely not for everyone, not for the faint of heart. What are from the leadership side? What are the traits, or even maybe what's the mindset that it takes to be successful if you're leading a startup or leading a team in a startup?
Yeah, so especially in my category in sales, I'll find there's about 3 things, right? So I'll talk about the leadership side, and then maybe even why it's hard to sell at a startup. On the leadership side, you really have to be 2 things, right? I mean, I hate to say it, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what your role is. You could be a chief revenue officer, you can be a sales leader. You have to be able to do the tasks that start from the bottom all the way up to the top. And you can't be at a startup. I've found very, very few like MBAs that come in and necessarily have the ability to lead a team, heart and souls and minds, right? From a sales leadership perspective, because they haven't done it. They haven't been in the trenches. So having that experience and coming up from the bottom, I think is really critical, because you also have a lot of credibility with your team that they know that you can actually do the work that they're doing as well. I think that helps. That's like wearing the 5 hats. I don't do SDR work. I don't do AE work necessarily, but I've done it before. And when I mentor and train, everyone understands that I'm credible, right? I can do that work as well. I think that's incredibly important. And then also having, I'll just say, enough experience. It'd be hard to take advice from, say, a 20-year-old versus, somebody my age. Obviously, I've earned the gray beard, but having experience really does help, because if you haven't been there and done it before in a startup environment, it's really hard to, right? Experience cannot be replaced when it comes to leadership in a startup. Have to have been there and done that to make it really, really work well.
I see. So the skills and the real world knowledge is way more important than education or training or any amount of knowledge.
So I won't speak to other parts of the company, right? But I will speak about sales. Yeah. It typically has to do, I'm not going to discourage anybody from getting a degree or getting a good education or an MBA. But what I've found is that to a certain degree, you got to take your lumps early and then understand exactly what it takes to be an elite salesperson to become one. I don't know that I've never met somebody that skipped the process and just said, oh, I'm elite. I've got, CXO communication. I've got a vast network to draw from. I've got all these other, it just doesn't really happen that way. Again, don't want to discourage anybody from getting into sales. I think it's the best job in the entire planet and probably will never change because people buy from people. There's a people component that can't be replaced by AI, et cetera. But yeah, it's, you got to do it. You got to actually just do the work and build a network. It's incredibly important. There's that saying or cliche that it's not who you are, it's who you know. I fully believe that. In a no ego environment, that works perfectly. It's not who you are, it's who you know. And I don't know who, I can't give an accreditation to this, but it's like if you want to find out who you are as a person in business or in life, just look at the 5 people you're closest to, your group of friends, your group of network. That's who you are. If you surround yourself by CXOs, you're basically in that group. If you're hanging around a bunch of, underperforming salespeople, pardon the pun, then that's who you are. So surround yourself with the right people, kind of build your network. A lot of that stuff takes time. Trial and error a little bit on sales for sure. Mm-hmm. Get a good mentor. That's definitely true. Always I always say this, always, kind of if you want to learn from anybody, and there's a team of say 10 at your company and that do what you do, don't get into the blame game and talk with the folks that are underperforming, find out what the best guy or gal in the company is doing, and then ask them, just like you would a client, like question them, find out what makes them tick and how they do it, and try and learn from that. You won't model exactly after one person, but you'll certainly, get some things that help you further your career and your skills.
Absolutely. Yeah. Whenever I want to learn from somebody, I always look for what's their mindset. How does this person think? Because if I can model how they think and the way they see the world, I can probably find my way to the results because the technical side will work itself out. So I think that ability to think in that certain way I found to be one of the most valuable things to model from a good mentor. You said, you mentioned AI a few minutes ago, AI not replacing salespeople because people want to buy from people, which I agree. There's AI is getting good. Nobody wants to talk to a robot, so to speak, and do business that way. Otherwise, we just have a bunch of robots doing business and things would be kind of weird. So what do you see? How do you see the future of AI and sales going? How do you see those two integrating?
So I've seen quite a few AI tools, and I'm not going to say all of them are bad. I mean, there are some that are really not there yet, but that probably is a development issue. I think there is good AI around what I would call outreach and interaction, right? But at some point, everything does step into the real world after the fact. So, I think there's great ways to turn one salesperson into 10, right? From an outreach perspective, from the communication perspective, what I'll call the digital communication perspective. It doesn't change what people do in a meeting. One of the major negatives to AI is if the AI is an amazing conversationalist and a great outreach agent and a great person, I'm kidding, right? And then they get into the actual call with somebody who is not, I think we probably all know where that is going to land, right? It's doesn't solve everything, but there are some great things about not only duplicating work, but outsourcing certain parts of the sales process. I do believe that generating interest, even though most of it is still done electronically in a way, like people still Google, they find out about your website or your service or your product via that means. That can change over time. You can actually, cold calling still seems to work, right? Not maybe to the level that it did in the past, but there's lots and lots of what I'll call AI that's out there that actually is beneficial. But it will never replace the idea of if I want to buy something and I know, trust, and like Zach Paul, then guess what? I know that at the end of the day, AA is not going to have my back after I purchase, but Zach will, right? I just don't know that has an AI replacement. And I've seen lots of bots that try to become as human as possible, but ironically, what they're trying to become is what most people want. They want the human. So it's an interesting thing. It's like getting to the speed of light. If you get 99.999% of the way there, you're still not at the speed of light, and it's light's going away from you at the same speed. I don't want to get technical, but like we can get really close with AI to help augment and help, but I don't believe that we ever replace the human interaction.
I agree. I like the light metaphor as well, because so you're saying it can amplify somebody's work, it can amplify somebody's output. But at the end of the day, there's some things that I think there's just an intuitive, we can kind of feel, right? You can feel when we're not talking to somebody, and even when you're talking to somebody that's mentally checked out, right? Somebody can have all the right things to say. I see this a lot with a lot of traditional sales training, is it's very focused on what to say, the script, even mimicking a tonality to sound a certain way that they think they're supposed to sound. But you've kind of missed that human-to-human interaction. So a lot of what I focus on is just exactly that, is more of the soft skills of behavior profiling and understanding who is this person, what makes this person tick. And like you said so well earlier, what does this person want? Right? What's actually valuable to this person? And I think there's an art, we'll see, who knows what could happen down the road, but it just seems like there's an art to human interaction that I don't know if a machine will ever be able to fully replicate. If it does, it'll get weird.
You bring up an incredible point, and I'll just share this with no names involved. I was talking with a principal at a large VC recently, and we interviewed, and he said something like, I don't believe that anybody under a certain age can actually do what you do anymore, Brian, because we've now everybody's grown up in the digital age, right? And they think there's like a math problem or a search or a scan or an app or whatever that can fix everything, but it doesn't really work that way. And it never has, right? So, that's a term that a lot of sales leaders will use, but know, like, and trust has nothing to do with AI, right? It has to do with people. And so it's not only that it can't be replaced, it's a skill set that's going away, right? Which is crazy if you think about it. And we need to, reinvigorate it somehow, because I can tell you that in the startup world, one of the hardest things to do, and I'm not offering training here, I'm just saying one of the hardest things to do is get into a call with another human being and actually care about what their needs are, do enough discovery questions that are not written down. You have to have them. You have to be genuinely interested and intrigued by learning about what might be causing them pain or where their big challenges are, etc. And it's an art form. It's really not the same every time. I can give you 500 discovery questions, but I doubt that you're going to actually either commit those to memory or understand when to implement them if you're not just present in a meeting. And I love that we have Zoom calls, and I love that we have, in-person calls, etc. Everybody's reading to a certain degree, but they're reading the human emotions and interactions and finding out where there's issues. Shockingly, in my opinion, because I'm sold something almost every day by one vendor or another as a sales leader, is that they get on, they read a script, they do their thing, and I'm like, wow, do you even know why we're talking today? Now, I'm a sales leader, so it's tough for them, but they don't in many cases. They're just, trained to be a little bit robotic and say, what's your budget? What's your timeline? What's it say? Those are basically offensive questions if you don't even know what I need or where my problems or challenges are. So it's an interesting time. I mean, I think there's so much to be learned about that first part, right? Just the human interaction, that we're trying to skip over and go to AI and say, like, it's a mathematical equation. You've heard this 1,000 times. Oh, sales is just a numbers game. I beg to differ in a big way. And I'll bring up one stat without trying to call anybody out on this, is that I was dealing with a CEO at a startup company that I'll just say I worked for in the past, so you could probably extrapolate here. And he said, and I asked him before I joined, I was an advisor, and I said, how many demos have you done for this product? It looks great. And he goes, 80, 0. And I was like, wow. And I said, how many have you closed? How many customers do you have? 1. Ooh, that's a tough number. I said, but here's what I want to tell you. Sales actually counts. How you present it, how you discover, how you figure out if it's aligned with their needs and it solves their problem is important. I said, let's do this. Let's do 25 demos together, because he had a long list of people that were interested, and let's see how it goes. He was like, okay. And I said, but I'll do discovery, and I'll do the selling, and I'll stop you in the middle of the demo to ask questions, and I'll close, and I'll do all these other things. And he said, okay. We did 25 demos. We closed 12 clients. 12 clients at a startup that had one customer that was basically 18 months old. This is not a coincidence, right? And so, of course, he's like, it's magic, it's impossible, that couldn't happen. I predicted it before we started, so therefore there's a proof to it. We recorded that call. And so I just think that that's something that people don't understand, and I can tell you that most companies don't find a way to understand sales and how and why it's important, et cetera, in the startup world. And so they go to market with like, I'm just going to tell everybody what we do. It's like, okay, good luck with that, right? That's not how people buy. And buying in many cases is emotional, right? There has to be something tied to it. And that could be personal gain, could be business gain, it could be solving a problem, solving a challenge or whatever. Lots and lots of motivations, but I've still yet to see an AI tool of any sort decipher what that is, even though some of the CI tools or conversational intelligence tools are pretty cool. They can actually discern things that I didn't think they could, but they're still not delivering a message. It's still just recording human interaction.
Yeah, and that phrase, sales is just a numbers game, is the flag waving statement of somebody that doesn't understand human psychology or doesn't understand, yes, it's just a numbers game. Because what I found is that as soon as you understand human psychology and what really, really drives people, you can throw the script away. You don't need a script to actually communicate with another human being. And I think we get so caught up. Everyone wants that's the tactic, or what's the magic line, or what's this $1 million, like everyone wants like the shortcut, but the shortcut is just understanding people and being able to communicate with people on the level that they respond to. So I think that's really cool that you were able to 12x their customer base. So very cool. Well, Brian, this has been absolutely incredible. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on and share your wisdom, your experience, and people listening. If someone was listening and they wanted to learn more or get more of Brian, where can people find you?
Yeah, well, the easiest thing is LinkedIn. I'm a big LinkedIn guy. You can see my profile there. You can actually even set a meeting there. Or, of course, more importantly, I won't give out my phone number for obvious reasons, but I will tell you, you can reach me at brian@hivepro.com. That's Brian with a Y. At hivepro.com, HIVEPRO.com. And be happy to, field questions, talk to you, even in pointers, by the way. I offer go-to-market advice on a regular basis, maybe too regular, but I'm passionate about the subject, so love helping out when I can.
Awesome. It's very generous of you, and really appreciate it. Brian, this has been awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.